Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Cosmic Perspective. On today's episode, I speak with a good friend of mine, Jim Stein, aka Dr. J, and we talk all about the current protests that are happening, how these protests are paralleling the protests in the 60s, an interesting story about Bob Dylan, voting, and kind of, trying to elect people who will actually support us, and navigating social media. So this one is all over the place in terms of what we cover, but I think it flows pretty naturally. Bear with me. I have like the longest intro of all time in the very beginning of this one. I don't know if it's just because I didn't know what question I wanted to ask first, but so bear with that. But then after we get through it and we start getting into the conversation, it really does start to really pick up. So if it's a little slow at first, bear with it, because it definitely does get really interesting as it goes on. But without further ado, here's the podcast. Thank you, Dr. J, for coming on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here and sharing some of my life with you and all your listeners, and I hope you find it entertaining and don't fall asleep partway through.
Don't worry, they won't fall asleep, Dr. J. You're an interesting guy. Well, so I just want to give a little bit of background here. Dr. J is currently my dentist, actually, but I met him before that through improv, and so he was part of my improv class, my improv group, and a great friend of mine. So I wanted to bring him on so that he could tell some interesting stories about his life, because he's got certainly some experience and grew up in a really interesting time that I think often kind of parallels our own time now, albeit and with a lot of different spins to it that make it a little bit different. So I kind of wanted to start off. Let's kind of go a little bit chronologically here and kind of go back to your early days, just in general, on the signs of the times. Put people in that place of like, okay, when I was growing up, this is kind of what was happening in the country. And, how does it feel similar to the positions that we're in now?
Sure. I grew up during the 60s. It was a time of great social change and upheaval, political change. And there were a lot of different movements that came in that time. The women's liberation movement, and the political change, gay rights movement was happening then. The change in how African Americans were being treated and brought into society or not, or being kept out. And there were huge, each of those three areas were huge movements of the 60s. And yet it was the most fun time I've ever had in my life. The middle 60s, the music, the country was on a roll, the economy was doing terrific. The Beatles came. There was a huge change in how people saw their life. There was more free time. Mm-hmm. And because of that, it allowed young people to begin to look out and see what kind of world they wanted to have. Mm-hmm. And their families had enough money to start sending them to college, and the political changes that people wanted were supported by the youth, but not by the middle class. Mm-hmm. It was all colored by our participation in the Vietnam War, mm-hmm. which it was a huge challenge for our country. And it's with the signals of having the change in who was in power. We were all baby boomers. We were outnumbering the people ahead of us. Mm-hmm. We were going to take over. That scared the hell out of the status quo. They wanted to keep it the same. They wanted us to buy the fact that the Vietnam War was a good thing, and we knew it was a lie. And the protests that flowed from that just were gathered up and embraced by everyone in our age group. Over 30, you were not to be trusted. And the protests that happened there, the marches, the walks, the sit-ins, the taking over college campuses, were looked at by the media and by the people who were in power as more than a rebellion. We were a threat.
Yeah. A threat to society as a whole.
It was. We were going to change the world, and we were not going to just sit back and let them have their way without protest, sit-ins. We blocked colleges. We made sure that our voices were heard, not only on colleges, but in the streets and in music. It reflected the protests.
Yeah. It's not too dissimilar from what we have right now, right?
It's not.
With the millennials.
It's not. The millennials and the
millennial
Zs are all out in force. And, you know, what's different about now and then is that in those days, a lot of the people in the country supported putting down the protests. They supported the police and all of the violent things that they did.
That they did to try to silence people.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And it led to some horrible things happening. Kent State, for example, and Vietnam. It was a horrible example of
tyranny.
Well, it was a tyranny.
It was tyranny.
There was the military-industrial complex that decided we are going to do this, and we're going to find a way to get young people to go there and experiment with all our new toys. It was a huge lie to the people in the country. And
similar to Iraq?
Similar to Iraq, yes. There are so many parallels. I think one of the differences that I see from then and now is that people at that time, they were willing to devote all their life, all their time, and willing to die for the movement. Yes.
Yeah, I feel like people are a little bit less willing to do that right now, and they're a little bit more willing to just put it on Facebook. Well,
that's the other difference. At that time, there was no huge way of getting a hold of everybody. You'd get flyers. People would run off mimeos on colleges and hand them out, or they would put a poster up, and that's how people heard about a march or a sit-in or some type of event. And now you can rally up huge numbers of people to go and protest within a very short time.
But you can also infiltrate that protest because they know it's coming, and then break it up from within by just having a couple people, literally a handful of people, start robbing stores. Then all of a sudden, oh, good, we discredited the whole movement.
Well,
you know what I mean? Like, oh, well, there's a couple people looting, so all the thousands of people who weren't doing anything, clearly they stand for nothing.
Oh, no. Yeah, exactly. The amount of discord and fighting that can happen now during these protests is huge. I didn't hear of anything that happened over the weekend.
Yeah, I didn't either.
And to disrupt it. But in other areas leading up to this over the last 5 years, there's certainly been tons of plants and problems created by opposition groups to
just trying to make them look bad, literally
and to stop the movement.
Exactly. You can kill the movement if you make them look bad in the media, and then you just paint them as, oh, look at these unruly protesters. That way people think synonymously protester equals bad.
Yes. And
not too dissimilar from the 60s.
No,
those damn hippies.
The way that we were put on television and shown to behave, they always picked out, the media
worst.
can do whatever they want. And the media created a huge problem for both movements. But I think at that time, there were so many people who were committed with their lives to making it happen that they didn't let that stop them, in spite of Martin Luther King being killed, Bobby Kennedy being killed, the kids at Kent State being killed, and sending off people to Vietnam
To be killed.
or, toyed with and whatever. It was just a terrible time. And yet, in spite of that, the protests continued and the social change occurred, and it is still occurring. And that was 50 years ago, 1968. The Democratic Convention was here in Chicago. My parents took us out of town. We went up to Chestnut Mountain up by Galena because they were sure that the entire city was going to go up in flames. And it wasn't too far off because there were riots on the west side, and we lived in River Forest just west of there at the time. And so they would take us up to Galena to get us out of the city and away from whatever. And yet, in spite of that, we were able to still walk in protest marches. One of the marches that occurred was Bob Dylan led a march from the western suburbs all the way down Lake Street to the lake, and he would stop in different suburbs and play music. And I remember sitting there at Keystone Park in River Forest when where we used to play baseball right there. And I worked for the park district, picking up leaves and raking, and cutting grass and this sort of thing.
Scrapping up a few dollars here and there.
Sure. And we sat in the stands where I played baseball and listened to Bob Dylan play Blowing in the Wind. It was a really moving thing. I was in 8th grade then, 1969, and he and his group continued to march, and I had asked my parents if I could go walk with them downtown. And they said, no, you're only in 8th grade, but your brother, who is a freshman in high school, well, he can go because he's in high school. So he ended up in Grant Park. It might have been 68 because that was when the convention was. So he ended up in Grant Park with his friends, and if you look closely at some of the pictures, all the guys look the same, long hair and all. And I'm sure one of those is my brother, and he and his group were chased by the police, and they were tear gassed and had to run away not to get beaten up or arrested. And the level of antipathy between the protesters and the police was huge, and the police did not hold back at all. And they just beat the crap out of these kids and arrested them, threw them in jail.
No cell phones for that,
No, there were reporters among there and taking pictures, but if you look at the kind of pictures, it was
they weren't trying to tell that narrative.
There were some of those, but the narrative that got on TV was, look at these rotten kids, and they're just causing trouble, and they're threatening democracy. And what we were trying to do is promote true democracy and freedom in our country,
which we know they don't want.
Well,
the infamous they.
The infamous they want to have the country run the way that they would like it to be, and
which is the way it already is, and the way that it keeps lining their pockets.
Well, it's been 50 years since then to 2018.
Hasn't really changed too much.
And a lot of it hasn't. And a lot of what has happened in the last few years with these protest movements and marches is that, it's great. They fire them up and get out there and they do these walks and all, but there isn't an organization. There isn't a continuance of any of these things into a well-organized movement that keeps up the pressures.
Exactly.
And with our government locked up in fighting with each other, there isn't a way forward to enact different laws. And what's really exciting about these kids that are out there now, the Z's that were out there this weekend, and the Women's March that happened, and the Me Too movement is that it's like never again, and the time is now, and we're not going to give up. And
we're not going to just keep waiting and nothing happening again.
No, we're not going to just have a party and then go home and then have
congratulate
the scene,
ourselves,
right? And then the scene repeats then just in a few months, weeks, and then we're in the same situation where people get killed or something stupid comes out of Washington that is very harmful to our country and our country's position in the world, and everybody is like, okay, so what? So what? Doesn't mean anything, right? It just is like there's so many things that happen that we're just getting used to it being.
We've gotten numb. I mean, we've gotten numb with information overload. It's just like every day you hear about some new insane thing. That how can you just keep caring about all of them? You can't. You literally can't even do it. And I don't think it's our fault that we can't keep up with the amount of information that's happening all around the world, and we just have more access to it. The world is safer than it's ever been. Statistically, it actually is. Around the world, it's actually safer. People are living longer, but it's so hard to see that when there are such glaring problems that still exist and they're getting worse. So even though overall things are getting better, certain things are getting worse, and those certain things have the power to rip us apart from the fabric itself of our whole social cohesion and our whole society. So yeah, we're seeing improvements, but not in the right places, or at least not enough in the right places.
Well, the government is invested in the status quo. It was then, it is now.
Probably always will be.
And will be. And what we have to do to encourage a change is to help these young people who are protesting and who care and want to make a difference register to vote and then go and vote.
We also need options, though, too, right?
Right.
We need people who actually are worth voting for. When you're given Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, you don't really feel like you have much of a choice.
No,
there.
You want to give them away.
Yeah. Because it's one thing to vote, but it's another thing when your vote literally doesn't count.
Well,
no matter who you vote for, you lose, and that's not voting.
At that level, there hasn't been some good choices in a long time.
Yeah.
Right. So what...
If ever, maybe. Honestly, we don't even know because we didn't live that far back. Like maybe the presidential choices of the day in the 1700s and 1800s, maybe they weren't so great either,
They probably were just as bad in a different way.
In a different way, yeah,
exactly. Way, and so... I think there's that old saying, I think it is, think globally, but act locally. And so what we need people to do is find out about their local elections. Like last week, we had an election here.
Yeah.
And the level of participation of people in the 18 to 29 was less than 10% came out to vote.
It's because they're disillusioned. They feel like, what are they voting for?
And there's not, with the access and ability to get information using digital means and social media and all, there is so much that could be available, but what is motivating them or what is not motivating them to go to the polls? One of the people in the class I was in just before this was talking about his friend who did not vote because he was now living downtown and he had to go back to where his parents lived in a suburb to vote, and just didn't feel like going out there on Tuesday.
And that though does feel like we should have the barrier so low that you'd have to go out of your way to not vote. Because I think the more that people voted, even if they're misinformed at first, we don't really want people voting when they're misinformed, but at the same time, if that's what we need to do to have them just thinking about it in the first place, then I think we got to take some, a couple elections of misinformed people voting to eventually get them into the swing of voting regularly. Because the more that people vote, the more that they feel like they're actually participating, the more that they then get invested in the outcomes.
Well, yeah, and so I want people to vote, whether they're informed or misinformed.
Right.
Hopefully,
hopefully they're informed.
But You know, there'll be an equal number probably of people misinformed on either end of the spectrum. So it may be definitely a wash. But getting into the swing of doing that, doing it regularly and making it a habit and making it
a holiday,
a
so
priority.
People don't have to like take off to vote.
Yeah,
that's ridiculous.
Why, you know, Tuesday, they've talked about why are elections on Tuesdays. That's just
they know no one will
crazy.
Vote. That's why.
Well, yeah, it keeps
they
the
don't
vote
really want people
down.
to vote.
No, they want to keep it
suppression
low.
Is key.
Yeah, so there shouldn't be like, oh, we're going to do this. Why not do it on Saturday? Right?
Exactly.
And
no,
now
agree.
you can go and vote early on any day of the week for up to just before the election. So
it's good that that's available, but I still feel like they're like, you have to have low expectations of the people. You literally have to set it so easy that people can't forget it or miss the opportunity or miss the deadline. It needs to be like, you can vote all the way up until like there's like a week-long voting period, you know, where it's like, okay,
right.
you can vote now, and it's like advertised on the news, and it's like, hey, voting starts now. You have until this day, so it gives people enough time to be able to vote, and then we just have to emphasize it. I feel like that's, you know, it's a blurb in a local news channel, and then that's it.
Well, you know, if you look at what the announcements are on social media, are there announcements that you've seen come up in your feed or anybody's in Twitter or Facebook or whatever else, other ones that you use that are saying to you, vote now. You can vote early. You can vote absentee. You can send it in. You know, I think it's safer not to vote online.
Yeah, it's like I wish we could do it online, but I just don't trust the system to not be manipulated.
Well, there's this, what is this, Captiva or whatever it was? That just stole all this. Yeah, they just took all this information and
which, by the way, shout out to Apple for not selling your data and protecting you from their scrapes of your text messages and phone calls, because on Android devices they were just straight up ripping that information off. Yeah. Illegal.
So, yes, exactly. So I don't think online will ever be a safe way to vote.
It can't. Until it gets to the point where it's kind of like Bitcoin, you know, where it's like encrypted.
Oh, a blockchain vote?
Something where it's like it literally, like the source code cannot even be touched. You know, but until we get to something that anyone feels comfortable with it being that airtight, yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the principle of being able to vote online, like for example, for like referendums or something that maybe isn't binding, we should just have it online, because then let's just gauge public support. Because if you show the politicians will never lead policy, right? They're never going to lead policy. They're going to go with whatever they think is safest that gets them the most votes. If we can show them through referendums and through public polling, online polling, where everyone can actually just participate, we can get an idea like, oh, 80% of the country is cool with medical marijuana and 60 to 70% is comfortable with full-on legalization. Okay, I think it's pretty safe to say that pretty much any politician could say that and not get crucified, you know? And if people had that data, then they would feel more comfortable taking those risks, because politicians are never going to take a risk.
Well, no, I don't believe they will. You know,
they won't.
The courageous ones do not last.
Well, yeah.
Long. Right?
Well, there are examples. So
there are.
There's one who I think a lot of people probably don't know about, and her name's Tulsi Gabbard, and she is a congressman from Hawaii, and she was a former military, and she's very like anti-war, and is definitely for the people. She's got a great track record. And she's supported because her people know that she actually gives a shit about them. Yeah. So there are instances like that where I think you can last long because, hey, if it's your own people that you're actually representing and they know that you actually represent her, then they're going to just keep voting you in. But I do think it gets a little more muddied in places that aren't like Hawaii. You know, I feel like Hawaii is kind of a special case in that she is able to pull that off.
I think that every place should be like that. And every place can be like that.
It definitely can. It can more now than ever. I think just people are disillusioned at this point.
Well, I think we've always had disillusionment.
Yeah.
What we have now is the ability to share information and behavior track record? What are people doing in who are our representatives?
Yeah, what are they really voting for?
Yeah,
we know what they
can't-
say in the
right.
sound bites. What are they actually putting their
so
ballots
I
on?
think we need a different way to communicate that to everyone
Mm-hmm.
so that they will make a better decision. And I don't think any of these
though.
How can we overcome what?
How can we overcome the biases though? Because there are going to be certain people who, even though you give them all the facts, all the information,
Right, they've
will
grown
reject
up a
it.
certain way,
Yeah.
right? And so opening people's minds to what is possible is really important. So going back to how I grew up in a town called River Forest. It's a suburb of Chicago. It's a very, it's an upper middle class suburb. At the time I was there, it was very homogenous. You were either Catholic or you were Jewish and living there.
Mainly
And
white people.
it was 99.999%
Percent white.
white.
Yeah.
No, wait a minute. It was 100%
It was
white.
100%
There was
white.
no. I remember coming back after I was married in the 90s when I moved back here. I went to the Jewel on Lake Street in River Forest, and there were two women pushing a shopping cart, black women, very nicely dressed, and I did a double take.
Because you're like, this
So
doesn't make
like,
sense.
Wait, this
in this area?
right? This doesn't. Yeah, this
Yeah.
is it was definitely some cognitive dissonance in that moment, and I caught myself thinking about that, like, oh my God, I can't believe. But that's what you were programmed.
Yeah.
And they saw me do this double take and looked over at me like, what the hell is wrong with that
Yeah.
guy?
Fuck you, man.
Right? Yeah, it's a free country, and
Yeah.
it was just stunning to me that I still had that built in, because when I went to a private all boys Catholic high school, and then I went to a public university.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the education of what reality
Yeah,
is
what it really
began,
is, for other
right?
people.
Anybody who was not Catholic was, well, maybe they'll eventually come around.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Nope.
No, then I was inundated with all kinds of different people from all kinds of backgrounds, and realized that, all of this programming that I had from 12 years of Catholic education, and the media giving you a filter for how things were in their projection,
Yep.
was not at all true. And I suffered for several years in opening my mind to having things different, to knowing that things were different than how I was raised. And because I was willing to be open to that, I know there's hope for a lot of people to open their eyes and see that reality is different than what they grew up as, and can make different choices in their life. So I have a lot of hope for these people, these kids that were from Florida, that have been on the news and all, are a very impressive group of young people.
Kids are smart, man. Don't sleep on the kids. They're smart.
No.
They might not have as much life experience, and that's fine. The fact that they're coming from a good place, as they get older, they're going to only become better and more empowered. And every generation that comes out always has to deal with kind of that initial hatred of, like, look at these lazy, entitled people. It's like, but who raised them?
Right. Yes.
Who's the one raising these kids?
Yes.
Because last I checked, we don't blame kids for, how they're coming up, right?
Well,
we shouldn't.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Well, no, we have for all of time and whatever. But I'm saying in general, though, it's a ridiculous premise, because these kids aren't old enough to know for themselves yet, and you can't expect them to know until they go off into college and live on their own. That's like the first time you really learn
encounter
anything.
with real life. Sure.
Exactly.
And
so we can't expect them, they're lazy, entitled, whatever.
Right. Well, and speaking of millennials, No. So they said the same thing about us as baby
Exactly.
boomers.
Yeah.
We were lazy, entitled. We were never going to make anything of ourselves. We weren't focused or determined. We were just all over the place. It didn't, and everything they say about each succeeding generation is the same thing until they come up and like, oh, well, geez.
They really figured something out.
Yeah.
Huh?
And exactly what you said. Who raised them?
Yeah, exactly.
If we're raising our millennial children, which I have 3 of, I love dearly, if you're listening, and they have grown up very nicely. So, but it's what did we teach them? What values did we hold them accountable for? What did we help them accept responsibility for in growing up and for their own life?
Not to mention, these kids, myself included, because I'm a millennial, we grew up with the internet. So we grew up with something that the people older than us, who are in a better spot in life, know less about than we do. And we're supposed to learn and navigate social media and have like relationships with people. And then you see this like online persona that you're putting out there and you're trying to project yourself as something that maybe you're not. And so there's this whole other dynamic that we are having to learn in the most important ages of development in our life. And how are we supposed to figure that out? Especially when our parents know less about the internet than we do. So we have to navigate this all by ourselves, basically. And we're not old enough or equipped enough to really do it at that age.
No. And the parents who have stricter or give guidance or direction, they're looked at as, just horrible.
You'll create a kid that'll rebel against that. There's a balance, It's like you need to have discipline, but if you're too strict, I guarantee you the second
people
they go to
break
college,
out. Definitely.
Those
yes,
are the
they
people
do
puking
break
in
out.
the corner,
Well, a few of those nights, and you learn to live a different way.
Some people.
But the young folks are you young folks. The younger generations are creating the new social way.
Yeah, they're creating it while also learning it. It's
right. They're learning what will it do? What can we do with this? And how does this work? And what I think people get in trouble with is putting too much out there.
Especially when you change later. You're going to say
or
something.
Or you hope to change later.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, just think about it. Like somebody could like get on you for something you tweeted 4 years ago. And it's like, dude, I'm not even that person anymore. Like, don't judge anything I said 4 years ago online.
Yes.
But people will do it just to be like, see, gotcha.
Yeah.
It's all about this. Like,
there's a lot of gotcha, right?
Yeah, it's the public, like, swarming mentality of like, oh, hey, we all hate this guy. Yeah, good. I'm glad it's not me. I'm glad it's not me. I'm glad it's like, I feel like the whole time that's really what it is. Like people are just like, yeah, I'm going to go on this guy so that no one ever discovers me.
Well, it's a bit of the Lord of the Flies.
Yeah,
right?
No, it is Lord of the Flies.
It is, it's right.
Every man and woman for themselves.
Right. And then people are banding together in groups that are sometimes helpful or not.
I'm team this. This is my team.
Yeah.
Just like defending it. Yeah.
Yes.
And that's where we get into trouble when people just take a team and then that's it.
Right. Well,
no nuance.
We're team human.
Exactly.
Yes.
We're all on the same team.
We are. And there has not been good guidance for how to handle these new powerful things. It's an open season. It's open. It's just.
I don't think we're any closer to finding it either, to be honest. I don't think we're getting any closer to navigating this.
It's getting more complicated.
It's getting worse. Yes.
Yes,
exactly.
It's getting worse. It's getting more complicated. People are putting things out there that are going to follow them forever.
Yeah.
And
whether it should or not.
Well, maybe when the millennials are in their 40s and 50s and sort of in charge of things, they'll have a much less discriminatory look at people who put stupid things online. when they're growing up, because it's like, well, we all did that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
it doesn't matter anymore, right?
Yeah, for your generation, it wasn't documented unless it was in a picture, you know, and that picture could just be destroyed.
or a police report.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. So, if it got that bad, then
right,
yes.
or you get suspended from school for doing something stupid, or so there were part of your permanent record that would follow you. But now the permanent record is like super permanent and accessible everywhere.
Searchable.
And it's searchable, right.
It's a little too easy to find that permanent record.
Yes, I know.
Even with all the protections. And then when you got people like Facebook straight up just taking your data and just selling it to the highest bidder.
Well, that is protections. That is the big lie. There are no protections.
There are none.
The big social media companies and the search engines are doing the same thing to us that the government used to do, except they're much better at it and much better equipped, and we don't know what they're doing. They produce these profiles of people down to every moment, every keystroke, every click, every slide of your arrow across the screen is being recorded and programmed into some algorithm to decide what you are going to see. Not what you want to see, but what we want you to see.
Exactly, yep.
And we're going to create a way that you will continue to see what we want you to see because we've seen your history. And we know how to continue to stream you in the direction we'd like you to go. Yeah. Which is super dangerous.
That's unbelievably dangerous because if anything has been proven over time and history is that we don't know what's best for ourselves. And so when we think we do and we have the power to influence people in the most subtle ways that they don't even realize they're being programmed, then we are going to turn ourselves into a disaster. We're going to push ourselves in a direction that naturally we might have been able to equalize out. But because we have so many forces pushing all these people in these certain directions, how are we going to ever stop something like that? This machine is so much bigger than any one company even. And so with all of this stuff happening to you and you have no way of not participating, you can't not use the internet anymore. You know, like you just have to do it because it's part of life. It's how you can excel in your career. So how do we even navigate something like this? We've never had this kind of problem before with such global implications.
Right. Not to this degree. And it is global. You know, our world has shrunk via the online places that you can go and connect up with people. So how do we make it ours instead of theirs?
Yeah.
Right?
That's a great question. I don't know. I don't have the answers.
I think that's the question to explore.
It is the question
and the question to challenge. And, this latest thing with Facebook is probably the third or fourth in a row. And it's like, oh, I'm sorry, my bad?
No.
That's not enough. That's really not enough. There is not enough protections. And that's where you identified that young people don't have a guidance or understanding. And
uncharted waters, man.
It is uncharted waters. And they're giving up stuff that they should not.
Yeah. We're
to
taking
protect
away
their
choices.
own. Yeah, to protect their own privacy and life and mind. And in the fun and games of social media, they're losing part of their freedom.
Yes, without a doubt.
And they feel it's free because they have freedom because they can post whatever they want. Look, I can do this.
But can you, though? Because if people just posted what they want, they might not get those likes. You know, if you really post what you really feel, you might not get those likes. So there's social programming within it that prevents you from actually post, even though the theory is that you could post anything you want. But if you want people to see it, then you kind of have to post a certain type of thing in order to get those likes.
If that's what you want.
But that is, I'm not saying that that's what I want, but that's what people want. Generally,
if somebody wants that, yeah, you can. Then they'll certainly filter what they put online. But
yeah,
a lot of people don't. They don't care. It's part of.
I know people that delete posts. I'm not going to out these people, but I know people that delete posts if it doesn't get enough likes. Like, that's ridiculous. You just shouldn't do that. You know, just own your post, dude. If you post it, post it. You know?
Yeah. Think of something else if you want more likes. But
yeah.
And I know I put things on and I thought, oh, that should have gotten more likes. What the hell? Well, and then I'm like, oh, these people are just stupid. They should have liked
and plus,
my
you
stuff.
don't know the algorithm too. The algorithm might hide your fucking post.
Right.
You know, I feel like sometimes when I post stuff,
yeah.
I feel like Facebook doesn't promote my stuff because I'm not paying them. Because I'm like a business page,
right.
They basically are like, all right, until you pay us, we're not going to show any of your shit. Like, I'm pretty sure that's how that algorithm works, is that they're going to suppress your stuff so that you feel the need to pay the money. And I wouldn't put it past Facebook at all to do this. And so then they suppress you until you start paying the ad campaign, and then they'll start showing your shit to people. And then that's it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's the game that they hook you with.
I continually get these little notices saying, well, promote your page, or you haven't talked to these people in a while, promote your thing. And
it's psychological. They're trying to break you
there's
down.
like this pressure to do that. And I don't really care whether I'm going to like let Facebook use me to push their agenda. It's my agenda. And I do think we need to have better guidance, though, for young people, to help them to see what the implications are of what they put online.
Follow it to the end of the
end.
Yeah.
Right. Here's how this could make a difference in your life. Although during teenage years, I did this too. You're rebelling and you're like,
you don't want to hear that shit.
To hell with you. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And the consequences, I don't really think about consequences at all.
The brain's literally not developed. I'm pretty sure that's why.
No,
you know?
It is.
It's not finished.
There is a risk-taking behavior that's biological during that time that actually helps you grow up, and hopefully you don't kill yourself in the meantime by your crazy behavior.
Hopefully the risk isn't too big. Yeah.
Right. Yes. But you get to the point where you find out that you are responsible for the consequences of your actions.
Yeah.
And at some point, hopefully that will sink in. In the meantime, we have to find a way to protect the privacy of people who are putting things online. And to prevent these companies from
exploiting
you by creating algorithms to manipulate your behavior, right?
To change how you think.
Yes.
Just by merely exposing you to pieces of information that then change how you perceive things.
Yes.
Because information, I mean, ultimately, isn't that it? Like, information, the more you take in, the more it's going to adjust how you correct your course. You know, if you're a thinking person, something's going to happen to you, and that thing happening to you is going to influence your future similar situations you run into. So if Facebook is constantly exposing you to certain types of information every day that you log on, then that's going to change how you think in general, just from whatever you're seeing. How can you stop that?
And it's limiting. You know, if they base what they show you or what they promote in your radar based on your history, then where is the opportunity to change or find new things? There are so many new or things that you're unaware of that you're not going to get exposed to. That's a very limiting factor of these types of services. And the anesthetic that they have injected people with is preventing them from expanding their life. And I think that
stagnate.
There is a lot of opportunity for other forms of social media to promote and expand people's horizons. But there is not a profit in it. or it'll be harder to get the profit in it if you say, well, did you think about this book, or did you think about going to this place or whatnot? That
it could be you. Yeah, I guess that's my thing, is I feel like it can be used to do that. You just have to advertise the right stuff, you know. So there are certain pieces of content out there that genuinely can change somebody's point of view, whether it's a book or a movie or even a TV show. There are some really good pieces of art that will show you a point of view in a way that your defenses and your biases are down, and you are more willing to accept the message because you're so engrossed in the thing itself and the way it's presented. So, when you have somebody just straight up telling you, hey, this is what it is, like, dude, I'm gonna be like, fuck you. Like, why should I trust you? I don't know.
Right.
But then you watch it in a TV show and you watch it play out for this character. You see all the factors that brought them to this decision, and you see the implications of what that decision ends up being. It just is easier for you to kind of put yourself in that shoe when you maybe otherwise are not like that. So I try to put myself in other people's shoes all the time. I really do. So that's something that I do all the time, but I know not everyone does that. And so sometimes you have to kind of almost trick them a little bit by luring them in with the method, and then eventually they get the message through, some clever means.
Well, I think, walking in another person's shoes, it's an unusual thing, and what the online streaming ability will change, in that you will be able to put someone else on. You can wear them, essentially.
Yeah.
Using
like VR.
Virtual reality, exactly. And so you can try out. It's almost like our improv or acting classes, in that in acting, you're given a script, and there's a character you're going to play, and you want to find out everything. So you're putting that person on yourself to impersonate them. Now you're given a script, so you're kind of limited, but you can also project out from there to see who this person's going to be, what choices they may make differently than what's in that script. That's one of the beauties of improv, is that you don't have a script.
You just kind of feel it out.
Yeah.
You put on the mask and you play the character.
Here's a few parameters and just go for it. You create a character and try it out and play it on. And so I think there's going to be an opportunity to use the online services of one sort or another that may not exist yet. Hint, hint, STEM majors, let's get with it.
Right? Let's
create
invent
something.
the Matrix,
yes, we need the new thing. We need Internet 10.0, not 2 or 3 or 4.
Yeah,
but
it needs
we
to
need
be like
to
several generations ahead.
Right, yes. Yeah. And I don't think it's that far away.
It isn't. No, it's way closer than people think.
Oh, definitely. And
could you have predicted the iPhone? In 2000, in the year 2000, knowing only 7 years later the first iPhone would come out, could you have predicted it?
The iPhone, probably not.
Probably not.
No. Well, we had the two-way wrist radio that Dick Tracy had.
Where's my car?
Right.
Yeah.
And then the communication things from Star Trek, kind of,
Yeah. And I do think that those are like the templates that we follow, right? We have somebody make the idea, somebody who's creative enough to think into the future in a way that, I know this doesn't exist yet, but this might exist. That ends up inspiring scientists later, like nerdy scientists who are like, I want to make that real. So we just need to have more people put that shit out there and have people buy into the vision, so then people are willing to put the money into those visions. Yeah.
Well, it's got to be fun.
It's got to be.
Yes.
It's got to be fun. Otherwise, people aren't going to do it.
No, they're not. And I think the opportunities to create these things are enormous, and will make it easier for us to progress as a civilization. I think the same barriers exists now
as they
exists
did then
when I was growing up, to having this happen. And what will take us beyond that is the creatives that will more and more even the landscape between the 1% and the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And that's where I have a great deal of hope and excitement for the future. I think it's never been a better time to be alive.
Yeah.
As right now.
Hell
definitely. Yeah. So
I agree, man. I think it is the best time to be alive. And although it's also the most dangerous, you know, it's certainly something that can be turned around. And I know Steve Jobs was a big believer in fusing the liberal arts with the sciences. And I think that really is kind of the key, is you can't just be sciencey minded. You kind of have to have that creative aspect too, because that's what creates new things that have never existed before. You need that imagination. Sometimes the science can be, oh, how can I improve what already exists? Which is fine. You know, improving efficiency, that's good. But we need to innovate altogether. But I think I want to end it here, because I feel like that was a good ending. And
it is a good ending. I really appreciate the
really
opportunity to come on and just ramble on with you about things that are important to all of us. And it's been good. So we'll have to do it again.
Oh, let's definitely do it again. I appreciate having you on, Dr. J, and see all of you guys later. I hope you guys enjoyed it.